welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. I'm your host, Shaun Haney. Thanks a lot for tuning in today on this Tuesday edition of the show. Hey, great stuff. We are going to do a farmer interview today. I'm looking so forward to it. It's with to be quite honest, with a very good friend of mine, and I'm looking forward to exploring her operation with you here today. So if you have a comment or a question for today's guest, all you have to do is enter it in the box, whether you're watching on YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook, and we're going to get to as many of your questions as possible. That's what makes this show so cool, is when the audience participates. And we had some great participation yesterday with yesterday's guest, Josh Linville. If you want to go back and hear that discussion, any of the archive of these shows, you can find them at realagriculture.com/live. So let's bring in today's guest. Here she is. It is Andrea Stroeve Sawa of Shipwheel Cattle Feeders out of Taber, Alberta. Andrea, how are you?
I'm really good, Shaun. How are you?
Good. And actually, truth be told, you're about a 2-minute drive from the studio here.
Yes, I am. I couldn't do this at the farm because I didn't have fast enough internet.
Yeah, it's a problem for a lot of people out there. So, Andrea, tell us about your operation.
Yeah, so I'm the fourth generation of our family to be, I don't know if I call myself a rancher or a farmer. I'm not really sure. So we have a small feedlot, and we produce compost, 3 different kinds of compost now. And we have, we graze yearling cattle on our grassland and have done that for over 40 years. And so we've made some really big improvements on our land. And my challenge now is to not only maintain that improvement, but now to go further. So it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge.
And a lot of these practices you've been incorporating in your operation, these go back to your dad, and your dad really being I would say a leader in some of this stuff. Before, talking about soil health before soil health was cool, that'd be Blake's mojo, I think.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And the things that we know now about like carbon and microbes, he wasn't even taught. Like, he's learning that stuff now because it's also new. But 40 years ago when he started, he just did it, just went ahead and changed our conventional grazing system into 65 different paddocks and 4 different grazing cells and went for it. And at the time, they all called him crazy, and the neighbors would drive by and go like this. And he, like, there was some major setbacks too. I mean, he took cropland and seeded grass into the cropland, and the next year he couldn't believe it. All he grew was kochia, and he couldn't believe it. And so he had this big in-depth talk with Alan, and he said, well, what you need is more cattle. And he just about fell off his chair. He was like, oh my gosh. So they put more cattle on, and eventually they did get a really big change. And that's what I currently manage now.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Running a feed yard in 2021 it's not a simple ordeal. It's very complex. It's difficult, and margins are tough right now.
And I'm a custom feed yard. I own just a couple hundred head in our lot right now. But I know that when my customers start to say, I don't know if I'm going to fill that pen, it's tough. It's tough. It's a tough time.
Yeah. So what is running a custom feed yard like? Are there customers coming back every year, Andrea, or is every year a clean slate? How does that, because a lot of people outside of Southern Alberta maybe don't necessarily know some of the models and stuff like that. So what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, typically it's the same people coming back every year. And typically it's people that I've worked with for years. And so if you do a good job, hopefully they come back. However, like years ago, it used, like Dad talks about having 20 or 30 little customers, people feeding 1 pen or 2. Now you kind of have 6 or 7 bigger customers that want to feed 1,000 plus head. Yeah.
And when you say do a good job for them, like what does success look like? Like what are some of the metrics that you're being judged on?
Yeah, it depends on if you're backgrounding or if you're fattening cattle. So if you're backgrounding, then it depends then if they want to take them to their own yard and finish them. So if they want to take them back to their own yard and finish them, I take them up to 900 pounds. And all I'm doing is building frame and muscle. And so they want an animal that's not fat by the time they get to 900 pounds, so that when they get them to the air yard, then they just explode, right? So typically gaining 2.2 pounds a day and doing that at a cost-effective way.
Managing death loss?
Managing death loss, yeah. yeah, this year's been a really good year for death loss. I think weather probably has something to do with that, but yeah.
With this weather that we've had, what have the conversions been like?
Well, it's probably a little bit too early to tell. Usually, like typically the cattle come in kind of the end of October-ish. So when you only have cattle on feed for 60 or 90 days, it's a little bit too early to tell. But my fat cattle that went out like November, December, awesome conversions, like under 6 for some. So that's really good. We were really happy with that.
Now, you mentioned Blake, your dad, but you've got others in the family working in the business too. So talk about that.
Yeah. So when I started doing this in 2015, when I took the feedlot on again, I said to my husband, Trevor, there's no way I'm ever working with you. Like, there is no way I'm working with you. Like, I can't be your boss at home and be your boss at work. Like, there's no way.
I can't double dip. There's no way.
I'm not doing it. I'm not doing that. So he said, well, you know what? I had a series of bad hires over the years. And I said, you know what? Every person that I'm trying to hire, I want them to be more like you. So I got kind of desperate and I said, you know what, let's just try this for like 6 months. And he was ready for a change. So we tried it for 6 months, and that was like 4 years ago.
I remember that.
Yeah. I was really nervous. It's not easy. Well, yeah, it's not easy to work with your husband, but we seem to do okay. And he has his role, and then he's really good at, and that I'm not good at. So it works really good.
And your son Trevin, he goes out there and he spends a lot of time working in the yard too.
Yeah, he does. He comes out. He knows how to feed now, and he's been pen checking quite a bit and learning how to use the computer system and everything. So that's been really good. He's actually considering doing his green certificate. So yeah.
Nice. Okay, so let's jump out of the feed yard first. And I know this is all part of a system, so I'm not trying to create separate little pillars here, but where does the rotational grazing fit into all this?
Oh, Shaun, not rotational grazing. We prefer the term adaptive multi-paddock grazing.
Adaptive multi-paddock. That sounds like something from Australia. What is this?
Well, it's basically taking, like, if you think of rotational grazing, it's just moving from one spot to another spot to another spot to another spot and getting back to the same spot. And if that's kind of linear thinking. And so if you're thinking of it in a systems approach, you're taking each paddock and assessing each one for its own paddock rating, but also for everything that's happening within the ecosystem. So how much rain did you get? How much is left over from last year? How many cattle do you have? How much forage are they eating? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And how is that affecting the water cycle and the mineral cycle? And
so how big is each paddock?
It depends on the cell. So between 10 acres, probably down to about 5 or 6 acres. And then we make them smaller too. Like, we'll put a temporary fence up in between so that you'll have probably, depending on the year and how brave I am in buying my grass cattle, you'll have 500 head on probably an acre or two for a couple hours to a day, depending on what we're trying to achieve.
Are all your paddocks irrigated?
No, I have 2 dryland cells. So we kind of run them together. And then I have 2, one big cell that's all irrigated, either under pivot or with wheel moves.
So you mentioned a rating. So how often are you providing a rating, and what are some of those things you're rating that paddock on?
So the rating is based on animal days per acre. We do that every single year. So how many animals are on that paddock for how many days? And then, so you times those 2 together and you'll get how many animal days per acre. So we've been doing that since 1982. And I was able to go back. Actually, it was really fun. I got to go back to 1982 and kind of quantify where we started and now where we are now. And then we surprised Dad and gave him like the overview of what he had actually done, because he's never really quantified it. So that was fun.
So when you're coming up with your rating of animal days per acre, doesn't the size of the animal matter in that calculation?
Yeah, but that's why you would base it always on a 1,000-pound animal. So I base it on a 1,000-pound animal, and then we take it down to, if these animals went out at 600 pounds, then you times by 0.6, and then you would assume that they're hopefully gaining 2 pounds a day, and then at the end of that month, you would say, okay, now now they weigh 660 pounds and they're going out. So then you would take times that by 0.66.
So what's considered a good score?
So basically that's just math, right? Animal days per
Which I'm
acre.
terrible at. So let's get that out there.
Yeah, so it's just basic math. So how many animals you have out there for how many days. But it really depends, especially on the dryland quarters. Like it depends how much rain you get. It depends how much, what have the past 3 years been like? How many animals did you have out there? How much did you leave out there? In some years, how much did the deer take over the winter? Just it all depends.
Bloody wildlife. Okay, so what's your mix usually look like in terms of what you have planted in those paddocks?
So that's all grassland. It's always been grassland. We have two cells that we kind of struggle with diversity on, and it's like a constant challenge. One of them is all mostly crusted wheatgrass, and then the other one is perennial rye. And then the one that's under irrigation, we don't struggle with diversity at all. It's got legumes and grasses. It's beautiful, but it's amplified big time because of the irrigation. And that, like I'm dealing with, to put it into context, I'm kind of dealing with 91% sand, right? Like I'm in a desert out there. So it's a very brittle environment. So any changes, it takes a long time to really take that change.
And so are you renting out that, like what animals are going on there? Are those your own animals that you're feeding out on grass then?
Yeah, we feed all our own. We buy them usually in the spring, backgrounders like 600, 700 pounds. And then we take them to the fall out there. And then we choose if we want to put them into the feedlot, or sometimes we'll sell them as grass yearlings out. Yep. But just depends on market by then. But
very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. Hey, got a question here from Devin. He wants to know, are there any policy or regulatory hurdles impacting custom feeders at this time?
Not that I know of. I think that if you're building a new feed yard, that becomes pretty sticky. But I don't know of any policy regulatory hurdles on custom feed yards.
Specifically, yeah. So speaking of that, how often do you have, like, what does pen maintenance look like? Obviously, there's fixing boards. Those are kind of things you do all the time. But what does pen maintenance look like at a feed yard?
At our feed yard, when we just had 146 kilometer-hour winds and 13 fences blow over, it's pretty intense right now. But yeah, it's something we have to always be maintaining. It's a constant thing. But yeah, the wind definitely wreaked some havoc on us.
Absolutely. I think on a lot of places. That was unbelievable. And we had 2 big windstorms within 7 days. That was the other part that was just absolutely nutty. Now, Andrea, you do some speaking at some conferences that are really dedicated to soil health and people trying to learn about some of the grazing strategies that you have had. But you're doing something really cool tomorrow. I'm pretty impressed. You're on a panel for a Globe and Mail webinar. What is this?
I'm not entirely sure where it's going to go. Yeah. They asked me to talk about soil health, and we've been working with some organizations that are measuring the amount of carbon that we're storing in our soil and measuring it against our neighbors that are not maybe grazing or farming in the same way that we are, and just seeing what the difference in the carbon levels are and tying that back to productivity. And so I don't really know how I got roped into this. I don't really know actually how I got roped into this, but I don't ask me any hard questions, Lindsay, please. So they wanted me to speak about soil health, and the other 2 people are kind of talking about the different tools that farmers can use to be more sustainable. And I think my role is just kind of talking about soil health and regenerative agriculture and how it doesn't really tie to one specific practice or another. Like just because I'm grazing, and that doesn't mean that that's the only way to be regenerative and to actually build soil. So for me, the meaning of regenerative agriculture is to actually build soil, because soil is one of the things that we're losing at such a rapid rate. Like I can't remember the stats, but something like 2.4 billion tons per person per day or some crazy thing. 24 billion tons of dirt is lost due to erosion per year. So for me, it's all about building the soil. And that's kind of a very complex thing, but I've learned so much about it. And it all has to do with carbon and driving carbon deep down into the soil systems. And then the carbon, nitrogen, and mycorrhizal fungi interaction between those is how it actually happens. So what I'm hoping to convey is that agriculture can be a part of the solution to the carbon problem instead of the problem. That's what I'm hoping.
A lot of times agriculture is framed as the problem, not necessarily a solution. Now, your audience at this Globe and Mail webinar, it's probably going to be mostly urban. I would expect you're going to get some pretty interesting, off-the-wall kind of questions where there's a lot of it's a good thing to provide. You're going to have to provide some elementary education on some of these things that farmers have been doing for quite a while.
Yeah, and I can provide the elementary education, especially when it comes to the carbon cycle. Like I can explain it as if I'm explaining it to Tanae, my 9-year-old. But if it goes any more scientific than that, then I have to pass it on to somebody that knows more than I do. But yeah.
Yeah. But you know what? I think you're a great example of somebody that's been really focused on this for a long time that knows a lot about it. So I couldn't think of a better person to be doing it. It's good. I'm interested to see how it works out, and you'll have to fill us in on some of the questions that you got and what the experience was like, because I think there is some misconceptions out there on some of the things that farmers are doing. And you pointed out, whether it's soil health, regenerative agriculture, sustainability, however you want to phrase that, there's a lot of ways to get the outcome that we're looking for.
Yeah, and it just depends on the tool that you're using and how that's affecting the soil. It doesn't matter if it's organic or grazing, or you're going to till or no till or minimal till or whatever. It's all tied to how we store carbon in the soil and how we drive it down.
Kent says soil is so important. Jacob says Andrea is awesome. Kent's asking a good question here. I think a lot of people struggle with this in the feeding business. How are 650 to 7 weight calves still at $1.90 to $2 when we're seeing unprecedented feed barley prices for fall? What am I missing? My math is my math bad? But I'm confused. Hashtag glad I'm a mixed farmer.
Yeah, I agree. The barley price keeps going up, and the feeder calf price still keeps going up. So your pencil isn't sharp, and neither is mine. I don't know what to tell you about that.
But Andrew, we've talked about risk. You've been a guest a couple times in the Farmer Rapid Fire on RealAg Radio, and we've talked about risk, and that's one of the reasons that you custom feed is because sometimes the environment just feels so risky to have ownership of some of those finished animals with some of these markets the way they are.
Yeah. And my risk tolerance level is very low, and so if I do own any, I really try to get them hedged off in some way, whether it's CPIP or the board or whatever. But yeah, that's the only way that I can do it and feel okay about it. But in the same breath, I still own a feedlot, and if the pens are empty, then that doesn't work either, right? So it's kind of a balance. It's kind of but you got to keep plugging it away. But definitely, I don't also, when being a custom feed yard, when my customers have pens of cattle that make a ton of money, I don't have that either, right? I just have a consistent flow.
You're limiting the downside, but not participating necessarily. So you're managing risk in a way that works for you. Jacob says too much feedlot space available. Yeah, people don't like empty pens, and they also what also happens, Jacob, to add to that, I agree with you, is that there's a big silage pit. You fill the pit, you pack it, you cover it, and it's like, now we got to convert that silage into pounds. And so there's a lot of pressure to do that too.
Yeah, for sure.
Here, I got a question from Kent about rotation grazing. With heavier soils, any tips for compaction during wet times of the year?
Organic matter is your key, because your organic matter will help your water holding capacity of your soil. So depending on, like, if you're in a really heavy clay soil type, depending on where your organic matter sits, that's how much your water holding capacity will be. So every 1% increase in organic matter increases the water holding capacity of the soil. So I would look to that first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good question, Kent. And Kent, you bring up a point I wanted to make is that when you asked about compaction, a great episode of The Agronomist where we focus completely for the 60 minutes on compaction. You can find it at realagriculture.com/agronomist. It was episode 1, actually. It has Marla Rickman from Manitoba as well as Peter Johnson, and we talk I learned so much about compaction in that. I think compaction is one of those topics that is so misunderstood. So Kent, check that out. If you have any more questions on that, let me know. What else? There's another question here I was going to ask. Oh, Devin, do you struggle or how do you manage invasive or noxious weeds if you find them sneaking into your pastures?
That's a good question. We do struggle. We do have a little bit of, we have, of course, thistle. And so we try to manage them a little bit, but I try to also look at the whole pasture and try to not focus on the one thing that I don't want, focus on the things that I do want. And so if I'm managing for the grass that I do want, then the 1 or 2 patches of thistle aren't quite so bad, as long as I'm managing for the grass. And then the grass will take over. That being said, I have been known to put like maybe a molasses block in the middle of the thistle patch to encourage the cattle to come there to get a lot of density onto the thistles. And then that density knocks the thistles back, especially if they're in like that first bloom stage, like right when the purple flower starts to come out. If you can hit them then, you can really get them. But yeah, it all has to do with your ecosystem and managing your ecosystem as a system, right? So depending on what your soil type is and how many cattle you have and what your grass looks like and what you've done in the past, it's a hard question to answer, but that's what I've kind of done.
Yep. Cool. Alan points out it's always fun doing corn silage. What kind of silage do you usually put up?
Usually typically corn. It fits into, and I actually, truth be told, I actually don't grow any corn. We have had growers that have grown for us for over 40 years and they're great. And so he grows it for us, and then we get a custom silage guy to come in and they bring it all in and we pack it. And yeah, and that again too is very different than it used to be. It used to be in the old days that they would come in and it would be like 4 or 5 different growers that would bring in over 2 weeks long. And now we have one grower and it takes about a week, 4 or 5 days to bring in all the silage.
Okay, so right away then people jump to what do you do with your manure? So you are composting. Talk about that program a little bit.
Yeah, so we in May when we clean out the pens, when we clean out the pens, we take it all and we put it into windrows on our compost pad. So we had to get a fancy compost pad that was all clay lined and such density. And so we put it into windrows, and then and we try to make sure that it's kind of a proper balance of manure and bedding. And then we turn it according to temperature. So as soon as it gets up to 150 degrees, then it's like go time, we have to turn it. So we'll turn it as many times as it needs. Typically that's like 3 to 5 times. Okay. And then, so it's a process that takes about 6 to 8 weeks before it's done. And then when it's done, we sell it to our neighboring crop farmers that need to put it on their crops. And it works really well for us because we're in a high potato field area. There's lots of potatoes and yeah, works really good for us. So there's potatoes and onions and, really high value beets, high value crops. And so it works really well in our area.
Daryl asked a good question. Daryl, I brought this up earlier. What the heck is a paddock?
So I say that a cell is like the whole field together.
Okay, cell is field.
Cell is the whole field. And then in a paddock, every paddock like this. So it's dividing the whole field into separate little paddocks. So the whole field is 130 acres. Each paddock is 10 acres-ish. So it's dividing, you would have 10 paddocks that were 13 acres each or something like that. Yeah.
Daryl, I pointed out it sounds very Australian. We're all getting used to this verbiage that Andrea is using, but Lindsay's doing the same thing. So, Lara says the more mass you have, the faster a compost pile will get up to temperature and decompose. You mentioned you're turning it 3 to 5 times. Is that what you said?
Yeah, 3 to 5 times. It depends on the year and how wet it is, and it depends on a lot of how much, because it's all about the carbon to nitrogen ratio. So the more straw you have, the higher it is in carbon, and then the more nitrogen you have, the higher it is in manure. And so the higher it is in manure, the higher it is in nitrogen, and that's what activates the compost.
So we want straw in that raw. We want straw.
We want straw for sure, but you also have to have the nitrogen to activate it. Nitrogen is the activator. Yeah.
And of course, that's when you haul the manure out of the pens. That straw is in the bedding pile. You're getting that from the kind of the bedding pile, right?
Yeah, and it sounds like it actually is kind of more of an art form to do it properly, and it sounds crazy, but when they're piling it all, you really have to try and get a proper mix of bedding to manure, and it sounds crazy, but it really is kind of an artistic process.
Okay, so to finish up here, Andrea, I wanted to ask you about, there's a lot of stuff going on here at Shipwheel. How do you balance all of that, and obviously, because I think a lot of farmers struggle with the family component of all this too. Like it's a busy time on the farm, especially in a feed yard. It's a year-round thing. So how do you balance all that?
There is no balance, Shaun. People ask me that quite a bit, and what I've kind of learned to say is there's absolutely no balance. I don't try and balance it. It's like grazing to me. I try to be at the right place at the right time for the right reasons. And so sometimes that means that I'm with my family more than I'm at the farm. And sometimes it means that I'm at the farm way more than I'm with my family. And I just try to do the right thing at the time for the right reasons. So it's always hard. I feel guilty 90% of the time because I'm not at one place or the other, but it seems to work okay. Yeah.
Work-life balance is an impossible sort of, people set themselves up to fail all the time.
Yeah. And I'm being interviewed by probably one of the most workaholic persons I've ever met. So
whoa, wait a minute. Hey, you don't throw shade towards the host. What are you doing?
You can when you're actually friends with him. You actually can. You work really hard, Shaun, and you do an awesome job.
Well, it's always fun to chat with you. Hey, anything else that we didn't explore in terms of the operation that you want to point? Wait, Lindsay, no, Andrea is not right at all.
I need to get to know Lindsay better.
Now I got my wife in here. She says I agree. Now we're like. This is I've lost control of my own show here. This is not good.
That's exactly what we planned. Good job, girl.
Okay, so I got a question for you. So we talked about Blake, your dad, at the beginning a little bit. Is he still active in the business, and how have you guys managed that kind of transition of responsibilities?
That's a loaded question.
Yeah, it is. I'm putting the heat back on you.
Yeah, I deserved that, didn't I? Dad's still involved to some extent. He comes in and he gets the mail and he goes to the bank for us. And typically he's not here this time of year. So I've had to deal with him since October. I've had the pleasure of having him around since October. And typically he goes down to Mexico or somewhere and is gone all winter long. So we kind of get to do our own thing. But he's never very far away. He always has a cell phone and I always get to call him for, one reason or another. And I'm very thankful for that. It's not very often that farmers get to have a person that they have on speed dial that has 40 years of experience that I don't have. So he offers me a lot of insight now. And now he's more involved in he helps me lots with marketing because I'm still learning that. I'm not very good at it yet. Okay. And he helps me with the bigger decisions. So planning capital projects and that kind of thing. But he at the beginning, it was really, really hard. I think that it was hard for him to let go. Yeah. And it was hard for me to be like, why can't you just let me do this? But I know that deep down, he just didn't want me to fail. But I'm very grateful that I've been able to do this with him and that we've made it out okay. There were some rough times and it was really hard at times, especially when at the very beginning, and we started off the feedlot. It was leased out for a few years, and so we started the feedlot back with virtually no staff. So it was him and I and a brand new set of staff, and that was really hard. That was really the hardest, I think. And we had a whole bunch of improvements we wanted to do to the feedlot, and so it was really hard and really stressful. But I've been very proud of him. He's learned to let go over the last few years. And we do have fun now. We do have fun. And he gets to go and walk along the pastures and smoke his pipe, and he
drink his tequila.
Drink his tequila, and that's what he enjoys doing. And I'm grateful that I can kind of give him a good quality of life as well, because he gets to still do that.
Oh, yeah. Awesome
and
stuff.
I get to do what I love, because I do love what I do. I absolutely do.
Great stuff. Andrea, this has been so much fun. I don't know what took us so long to have you as a guest here on the show. Thank you so much for joining us here today and really kind of pulling back the curtain and exploring your operation with us and kind of some of the things you do. And best of luck tomorrow on the Globe and Mail webinar.
Yeah, no hard questions, Lindsay.
Andrea deserves it, Lindsay, after what we saw here today. Okay, everybody. I want to encourage you today, RealAg Radio, 4:30 Eastern, 2:30 Mountain. We got a great lineup here today. We're going to hear from the chief economist from BMO all about how he sees the economy in 2021. So you're not going to want to miss that. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Live, and we'll see you again tomorrow.